It's a beautiful story of the first reading, isn't it? A simple story of conversion, which, upon reflecting on this story, I believe it can be associated with many things. But I believe, my dear brothers and sisters, it's primarily the story tells us about God's sovereignty. That God is God who can save anyone regardless of who we are, regardless of our past experiences. And it is also a story of how God does not look down on human beings, on us. We are worthless. It is a story of empowerment. Empowering from being hopeless and unworthy to be an instrument of God's missionary of the gospel. Let us reflect on these points as we read this beautiful story of St. Paul's conversion on the road to Damascus. First, no one is useless to God, or I would say no one is worthless to God. It is ironic, really, to see a chief persecutor of believers become a very committed believer and willing to spread the gospel. St. Paul. He can transform anyone after that story of killing many people. Paul would have been the least or small person we could expect to become a believer in if we follow through his life, his story. But he preaches the gospel against his will and death of others. The ways of God are not like ours, my brothers and sisters. No one is useless or unusable to God. The second point also we can reflect on this story is God can save anyone. There is no one beyond the saving power of God. That's very clear. God can transform a sinner into a saint in just split second. And that was exactly happening with Saul became St. Paul on the road to Damascus. Within a second. God was more than happy to forgive Paul or Saul for all that he did to Christ's followers, Christians. God will, dear brothers and sisters, like Paul, do the same for us. We are, yes, imperfect beings whom the divine grace of God can redeem. And finally, this story also tells us about Paul's missionary zeal for the gospel. Paul eventually, after all this whole process, committed himself to God. Christ has become center for his life. Paul lived for the gospel to be spread. He fed, he slept, and breathed the gospel. Paul's DNA became a gospel. This is what Jesus tells us in the gospel as well, dear brothers and sisters. The same spirit of Paul's live out the gospel. As the Father who is life sent me, and I have life from the Father, so whoever eats me will have life from me. Jesus embedded himself with the Father and committed to preaching God to all nations. For Paul, he shouldn't allow anything to derail the task that God ordered or gave him. He followed the order from the Lord on the road to Damascus. Go, this man is my chosen instrument to bring my name to the pagan nations, their kings, and the people of Israel. Invitation to each one of us today. I believe each has our own story, conversion story, that kind of Damascus story. Let us first of all understand our story conversion and ask ourselves, who and where was God in your story of conversion? Who and where was God in your story of conversion? If you're able to identify that story, then you ask yourselves again, if we have been transformed like St. Paul or empowered, can we also transform others in our surroundings, in our task, in our mission, in our work? Remember these words, that God does not empower the competent or those who have capacity, but an empowered God would be able to empower every human being, including the incapable. Let us surrender into that spirit of St. Paul's story to Damascus.